My guest today is Sean Doherty. Sean is a learner, a mentor, developer, a leader, and speaker that I've had a chance to work firsthand with in a previous career. So I wanted to bring him on the show, and you'll see why. He's a tech leader in North Carolina with over 15 years of experience. He's got a passion for creating software, but also investing into people. Some of the things he's done in his career, he's led over 100 different applications that he's built, from startups to Fortune 50 companies. He helped develop one of the first 500 apps on the iTunes App Store. He's mentored over 150 software engineers, and he's been a nationally recognized speaker. Amongst all of this, I was just curious to talk to him about what does it mean to provide, and what is it like to be a man of faith in the software industry. So he's got a lot of passions, and he shares that with us. So enjoy this conversation with my friend, Sean. Sean, welcome to the podcast. We're live.
All right, let's do this.
I have been wanting to have you as a guest, and the reason is you and I were in the foxhole together. Small business leadership. You saw the best and the worst of me, and I thought, what a wonderful conversation we can have about God providing for us so we can provide for others. So thank you for joining me finally.
Yeah, it's great, man. Looking forward to it.
When I left that company, you provided for me in a very practical way a very gracious card, and you always go deeper than expected, because those that are watching the podcast or listening to your voice might think like, oh, this is like a rough and tough guy, because he is well educated, he's got strong opinions, and at the same time you've got such like a teddy bear heart where like it surprises you when you get a card like I got from you of like, let's stay in touch, Justin. So love our time together. You found the fight song of my alma mater, a small college in Virginia, and even had a little like, thing about my favorite sports teams. So I wanted the listeners to know how I view you as a Renaissance man and how you have a 360 view in my life professionally. And just thank you for joining me again.
Yeah, wow, cool.
So I connected with you about doing this podcast, and you said, actually, let's do it after my big trip. So tell us about that big family trip that you recently took.
Yeah, so I guess starting back in 2020, our family was prepared to go to Indonesia. My wife grew up in Indonesia. Wanted to for a long time get our kids out of the country. I found a lot of value in gaining perspective and seeing other cultures and other places and different people living lives in different ways over the years. And so we really wanted to go overseas, and we wanted to go to Indonesia because my wife's family was, her parents were going to be retiring from the field and coming back soon. Then COVID happened. We had our passports ready to go, and then by the time we were going to go, they wouldn't let us in the country anyway. So we had wanted to go overseas for a long time, and the kind of opportunity came out of kind of nowhere, where two of my coworkers at a company I was working at found out that they were dating, didn't realize they were dating, found out they were getting married, and they said, "Hey, like, do you want to come to the wedding in India?" And I'm like, sure. I think they were surprised that we were saying yes, but we came, all seven of us, made the trip, and it was really cool. It was outside of Mumbai. So it was really a great opportunity for them to see a different world, threw them in the deep end. Some of them had never flown before. One of them had never flown before. None of them had ever been out of the country. So it was a lot of flexibility. That's what we kept saying. We're going to be flexible on this trip. We're going to get to learn a lot of stuff and be flexible and find out new things. And it was great. I couldn't have asked for a better time to be with them, and get them to see a different world and get to see things that they never would see here in North Carolina. Certainly never, in their privileged world of having everything that they need. Certainly never see sort of the lack of that there. But just also, people having their own lives and their own spheres and their own differences and living life, and that perspective, I've already seen some fruit in it, but hopefully as they get older, they can look back and remember that. We have other trips planned now, but now that we got the bug, but that one was certainly one to start the memories.
Yeah. And so 5 kids, what are the age ranges right now?
So the oldest is now 15, and then the youngest is 6, going to be 7. Yeah.
Talk about a test of provision, like, taking the whole family, overseas and doing that
Yeah.
in a place. So, you wanted to do this for your kids to expose them to different
Hmm.
people, perspectives, and whatnot. Were those hopes met? And if so, like, kinda give us a story.
Yeah. Um, I mean, certainly. So it was a Hindu wedding, which they had never seen any of that before, right? Um, and so we got to talk through a lot of different things. We got to, go see the slums of Mumbai and have them see kind of like talk through like what's different, what's the same, what's different. Um, Getting them to just kind of walk through the city and there's just people everywhere and noise everywhere. And sometimes they're overwhelmed. And so we had to kind of take it in part and parcel because, it's very different from walking around a neighborhood, which, is pretty quiet to, the streets of Mumbai, which is, one of the most densely populated cities in the world. Um, it was funny. We were at a festival in Durham before we left, and there were people everywhere. And the people were like, we were walking by people and that kind of thing. And I was trying to describe to them, picture each person in this crowd times 26, and that's the density in Mumbai, right? Like it's just a different scale of humanity everywhere all the time. And
Mhm,
so, there are parts of it they loved. They loved the driving. They loved the rickshaws. I love not having to drive. So that was great. I love public transportation. So in India, it's way better than here. Honestly, it was way easier to get around. You just hop on a rickshaw, and they loved getting on to drive on those, and um, you know getting to see just all kinds of new stuff, right? And so
mhm,
I think it was really good for them to be able to see again the perspective of there's different life out there, and there's different people having sometimes the same struggles, sometimes very different, but really wanting them to see that what they know is not everything, and there's different spheres of the world out there, and wanted them to really be able to experience that. So yeah.
mm. And it sounds like that experience has now broken the seal, meaning, like, you guys are ready for the next trip.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, what I want the listener to also appreciate about you is your, um, analytical brain and background as, you've got your master's in computer science, and you've been a CTO for a long time, like, whether in title or practice or a combination of both, and also done some speaking on technology. And so I'm curious now, give the listeners and myself, like, an idea of your professional life today.
Today, so I prefer to work at smaller companies. I like to be able to be involved in lots of different things, and so I love to be able to have a lot of impact, to be able to work on different things, and to be able to sort of have my hands in different things. Um, and so that comes with just a challenging work environment, right? It's different, but it's certainly challenging. It's mentally taxing. Um, and sometimes it's hard when, I've had to learn a lot of skills in my career to sort of keep a firewall between work life and home life, right? And so for me, like the pandemic was really hard for me because I didn't have the separation time. Working from home, people love to work from home. I can't work from home. I need the drive. I need the separation. I really don't like to drive, but I like the separation of work and home to be able to have a time to shut my brain off and then turn it back on again. I didn't have that in the pandemic. It was rough. So I think my work is part of my life, and it's often crazy. There's a lot going on during the day, but when I go home, I really try to shut that off and try to be present. Sometimes I'm successful with, sometimes it's really hard to do, uh, but that's sort of what I've learned, and the only way that I could be the father I wanted to be and be the husband I wanted to be. Over the years, it's meant that I've lost out on things and missed out on things. You mentioned like professional speaking things. I've gotten to speak at a lot of cool things. Certainly more if I decided that's what I wanted to do all my weekends, like, and wanted to go fly around and do different things, or um, even spend a bunch of time doing side projects. It's a big thing for software developers. What's your side hustle, and what kind of things are you doing on the side? And some of those things I kind of had to say, you know what, like, I can't do that and be a father and a husband. Some people can, and that's great. I can't. So, um, sometimes that means I have to give up on those things to be able to do the things that I know are more important and more valuable to me.
Let's put a stake in that because that is so like real and practical, and something that I'm also learning to do. So how you phrased it was a firewall between
Yeah.
you work at
Sorry.
home,
Yeah, that's
a
the
tech
nerdiest way to say that,
a
isn't it?
tech
Yeah.
term there, which is great. Uh, so for those that don't get that, like for you, what does that look like? Is it actually
Yeah.
putting your phone up, or like how do you practice being present with your family, and maybe give us kind
Mhm.
of your strategies that we can learn from?
Yeah, I mean, I've realized being in jobs where like it will take as much mental effort as you give it, right? Take as much of the mental shelf space that you have as you're willing to give to it. Um, Things like taking that opportunity when I'm driving between the places, like physically moving where I work is really important. I'm not the kind of person that can jump in and out of work. Like if I'm there, like I need to be present because I'm doing 50 things at the same time and having to keep track of 50 things at the same time. So that physical separation and then being really diligent about those separation times. So when I'm driving in the car, like I don't take work calls, but except if it's absolutely 100% necessary, right? And even then, I try not to do it. So I'll do something that's not work related at all, and try not to talk about work. Like my wife knows, like starts asking me questions about work. I'm like, I don't want to start thinking about it. So if I start thinking about it, I'm going to start thinking about it, and then I'm not going to be able to be present. So that's kind of part of it, right? And so if I do have to do stuff, like sometimes in my job, like there's stuff that happens at night or some happens whatever. Uh, Still trying to take the opportunity to have a little bit of a break time in between. Like sometimes I'll take a walk, sometimes I'll just do something that's not related to anything before I try to go downstairs. Like if I'm working, upstairs and trying to get something done before I go downstairs, I'll take some transition time to try to simulate that like resetting of my brain. Because otherwise, it's just, I'm not a good, if I either direction, I'm bad. So in other words, like if I go from home right into work for the first 15 minutes of work, I'm bad at work. And then the other way around, and once I leave work, if I go right home, like I'm bad at home. Like I'm not present, my mind's somewhere else. I'm not able to think about the things I need to think about. There's also like penalties, right? So it's really hard for me to do stuff during the day. Like I forget to do the thing I need to do. So I have to like put stuff in my calendar or set reminders on my phone. Because when I'm present at work, I need to be present at work to do the job that I have. There's just too many things going on to try to keep up with, to not have full mental focus. But there are things that need to get done, like I'll try to separate out those times during the day. Personally, for me, I also, you know, really try to segment my day and do things like I go out to eat a lot for lunch. I tell people it's cheaper than therapy to go and walk around and go out to eat. Right. I love the break during the day to be able to do that, to be able to go take a walk and try to get something to eat or whatever. Um, I really enjoy it too. So it's also a good opportunity to kind of separate out and do some of the things that I need to do for home. A little bit of a break during the day, but yeah, those separation times are invaluable. And I learned that through the School of Hard Knocks, learning how bad it was when I didn't take that time to separate. So yeah, I'm pretty rigid about that, and pretty hardcore about that separation. I guess the firewall is probably the nerdiest way to say that, if I'm fair.
It brings up a couple stories, memories of you. One is, you would always come into the office talking with your dad, or
Yeah.
brother on the phone, and so, like, I could tell that was an important part of your work
Yep.
schedule, and, uh, I guess the other thing that I was reflecting on too is just how fun it was to see how you're able to not only do the work, but also you love teaching and you love mentoring others, and so I wanted to ask,
Mhm.
who provided for you along your way? Because you're so good at training others. You've done that in a previous
Mm.
profession, training software developers formally and doing it informally. Who showed you how to be a good mentor or trained you up that you're so good at it now?
Wow, that's a good question. I don't know that I've ever really sat down and thought about that. Who mentored me over the years? That's a good question. So I guess I'll answer that by saying, along the way, everybody that I come into contact with, I try to learn from and try to learn things from. So I don't know if there's any one in particular person who like particularly had like a mentor relationship, but I pulled things from different people, right? Like, I mean, working with you, you bring a level of excitement that I still remember trying to do sometimes things that seem in the moment like, why are we doing this? But it's fun and it's, brings a level of, enjoyment that sometimes you need to break up the monotony, right? Or break up the just you can't talk about work all the time. You have to do something that's a little bit different and out of the box. But working with other people, just learning like diligence, learning focus, learning kind of like the ability to really focus on excellence through your work and really like bringing integrity to your work in software and technology in general. It's pretty easy sometimes to feel like you can just pull the wool over this person doesn't have any idea what they're talking about, right? And so sometimes that could be easy, but like working with integrity to sort of say when things are not working properly or when things are not done correctly. um, I have a really hard time like not saying things in those situations, right? That's my own personality, but also over the years I've learned how valuable it is to, call a spade, and sometimes it's you got to call out when something's not done right. And so, um, and rather than just staying quiet and just letting it go, being able to just say something is really important. uh, I had lots of really great teachers over the years too, in school and in my personal life. But I don't know that anyone in particular sort of, I mean, stood out. I had great professors in college. I thought for a long time I wanted to be a professor. That was what my track was. That's why I got my master's. Was I thought I was going to get my PhD and be a professor. Then realized academia is not fun. Academia is not a great place to work. Certainly not a great place to raise a family. So that kind of was out. But yeah, still love to teach, still love to train people up, still love to sort of bring people along and sort of help them see kind of parts they don't see. That perspective is really valuable to me.
Hmm. When did you have that moment where you're training somebody or you're mentoring them and you just see the light bulb go off? Like,
Oh,
whether it
yeah,
was, yeah, like, what does that feel like? And can you like tell us a moment of that? Because it might inspire others to say, oh, yeah, I've been
sure.
meaning to invest in this person. And it might be helpful to know that, gosh, that when that light bulb does go off, it's so rewarding as a mentor.
Yeah. I mean, it happened all the time at the code school that I started and ran. Being able to see sort of people go from I've been told how to do this to I know how to do this, right? When they really own the solution and own the what they're actually doing, and it's not just, I struggled a lot with sometimes people learn by well just do this and then eventually you'll figure it out, right? Push this button, get this result. That's a lot of training for software. Is just push this button, don't get the result. Just don't ask questions. Don't really understand why. I spend a lot of time teaching the why and understanding exactly why that button made that result. And so sometimes that took a lot longer for it to pay off, and sometimes that frustrated people. Like I used to say that I really valued longer learning arcs that ended up with a deeper understanding. So rather than the quick payoff that I could get them to like, oh, they made this thing jump on the screen, like great. Really getting them to deeply understand what they were doing so that they can sort of grow and expand in their own learning themselves. That's really important to me. So in training, sometimes that didn't happen for like something that I was really focusing on at the beginning of the time teaching them to the very end was when it paid off when they're building something for their own. They're like, oh, that's why you said this 3 months ago, right? Or having old students of mine come to me, that time that you talked about this thing that just happened to me at work today, and I was like, I heard your voice in my head telling me what to do. I was like, yes, that's the payoff right there, right? That's the thing that really is valuable to me, is helping them to sort of really deeply understand what they're doing, because everything changes and software changes all the time. And so I
Hmm.
used, really feel strongly that if you don't understand what you're doing, then you're not going to be able to grow and expand when things change, and they always change. That doesn't mean that you can't do anything until you know everything, right? You have to kind of balance that, because there's a lot that you can do with knowing almost nothing. But there's sort of a value in really asking why and being desiring to know the answer why rather than just being like, yeah, I don't care why. I just great. I know that thing. I'm done. Put it in my box of things I can do and move on. People that are really curious go a long way in this industry, but lots of industries, right? People that are more curious generally get to go further.
I loved your phrase, longer learning curve, and then being okay with
Mm.
that. And that shows a level of patience, not only from the student's perspective, but yours as a teacher.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes they just would be lost for a while. I had students that came to me and were, and basically in tears. I'm never going to get this. I mean, one thing that is also really valuable is different learning styles learn in different ways, right? That's a really important thing for people to understand because when you're learning something new, sometimes people get really frustrated because they look at everyone else and they say, "Well, why am I not learning the same way they're learning?" Right? I've heard that you can just go and watch YouTube videos. Like, why can't, when I watch YouTube videos, I don't learn? And what I found was a lot of people, that came to our school would be in that boat. Like I had one woman who, I remember the first week she came in tears. I mean, I had a lot of therapy sessions. I used to tell people I was a full-time therapist and part-time teacher. Um, but, you know, she came in tears. Basically, I watched 50 hours of YouTube videos last weekend and I don't get it. Like, and I'm like, well, maybe YouTube videos is not the way you learn, maybe watching YouTube videos is not the way you learn. And we found out she was a kinesthetic learner, which is not served by most of the educational tools, right? So she ended up taking notes and then rewriting her notes every day after class, and that was all she needed to do, and she got it. And doing things physically meant the world to her learning, where she just thought, I just need to learn like everybody else, right? um, and so those longer learning arcs you mentioned, honestly, some of those turn out to be, they're longer because people don't know how they learn themselves. And so um, yeah, finding a lot of value in that, being able to find what works for them, and then when that light bulb goes off, that they're actually learning something and getting it, and they start like making those next leaps, and you can tell that they're starting to like ask why themselves and sort of come up with their own answers. That's when the payoff happens. Yeah.
Hey everyone, Justin Thomas here. I hope you're enjoying this episode of Become a Provider. I wanted to take a moment to tell you about an exciting new ministry and an opportunity to make a real difference in someone's life. We're launching the Provider Fund through the C.L. Thomas Fellowship nonprofit. This fund is designed to support individuals by covering the cost of a direct primary care membership for 1 year. This membership will allow them to work closely with a medical provider and invest in their health, something we believe is crucial for everyone. Our goal is to raise $1,200 to fund this initiative, and we need your help to make it happen. If you feel moved to contribute, please visit clthomasfellowship.org to donate. Your generosity will provide someone with the resources they need to improve their health and well-being. Together, we can make a significant impact, and my wife and I will match any donations up to the first $1,200. So that way, we can not only give one person a direct primary care membership, we can do two. Go to clthomasfellowship.org if you'd like to donate towards the Provider Fund. Now back to the show. Yeah, to know how we learn and be okay with a longer learning curve, that's probably, you could be pretty successful if you nail those two things down.
Yeah. Yeah. But it takes patience though. It's not the quick payoff, right? If you And the other thing is sometimes it struggle with people like, well, this shouldn't take me that long, right? Um, to learn. And sometimes you need to be able to get to the point where you need to, and it's not bad. Some people learn things really quick. Other people take a lot longer. There's a lot of people that are studying stuff about like the tortoise and the hare kind of thing, right? Around learning, and there's a lot of we do a lot of things in society to really sort of accentuate like the hair learners, people that get out really fast and be able to pick up things really quickly, but sometimes not as deeply. And we devalue the tortoise learners, the ones that take a longer time, but by the end they've spent more time in it, so they have a deeper understanding of it. As employers, we know that the people who spent the time and really deeply understand it are more valuable to the company. But all of our hiring techniques are built around like, can you pick up things really fast? How quickly do you learn things, right? And so we're getting a bunch of hair learners, but we all know that we want the tortoises on our team, right? We want the ones that are going to go away and come back with the answer and it done, rather than the one that's going to give me 15 minutes. Yeah, this is the answer, when they don't really know what they're talking about. They're just firing something off and hoping it works. So Yeah, it's a deep subject there, Justin. I could talk about that for a long time.
Well, that I love this. I love this, and I want to use this as a nice springboard into now we all have an appreciation for your respect for learning and for investing into others and understanding the why. So, why are you a man of faith?
Mm, yeah, that's a great question. Um, I think where I grew up um, wasn't a lot of faith, right? I remember reading something about Time Magazine did a study of the most godless areas of the country, and number one was literally where I grew up. Um, there's everyone's nominally Catholic in southeastern Massachusetts. A lot of people, immigrants or from different countries, but all Catholic, right? And so, but it's like nominally Catholic. Like in the South, it's the same thing as someone calling themselves a Christian down here. It's just they go to church sometimes, but not really doesn't really mean anything to them. Um, and so, growing up, didn't really have a lot, right? Didn't even have any Christian churches that I knew of, right? There was only really like one or two in my hometown. The whole thing. So, yeah, I mean, going to high school where I came to faith in high school, and when I came to faith, I was like, oh, like let me see if there's like a Christian group on campus. There wasn't, so I had to start one, and there was only three people out of the 1,300 kids in my school that went to it. Like that was it. And we looked. That was pretty much the only people that said that they wanted to go to a Christian group that was actually called themselves Christians. Um, so that was interesting. And then going to a college where there was about 30 believers in a school of 3,000. So that's kind of like where I grew up, right? This idea that um, it's not going to be something that is based on just what everyone else is doing. In a lot of ways, it's easier to see kind of who stands out there. But my faith journey came out of, having a lot of really hard things happen in my life, and then sort of God bringing about an opportunity for me to realize that I wasn't, you know, living a life that mattered, and I wasn't living a life certainly that was honoring to Him. Um, and really had an opportunity around my sophomore year to sort of really understand that like God is real and he is who he says he is. Spent a lot of time reading a lot of things about a lot of different faiths, a lot of different things, spent a lot of time diving in. Used all of the science and stuff that I grew up on, and really spent a long time trying to look into things. And came out with the fact that like God was the most plausible solution, and the faith that comes from realizing that there's really no other option. There's no other thing that makes sense to me. I know that's from faith, right? It's not my own knowledge. It's not my own like logical brain or whatever that's trying to figure things out. But the other thing I'll say is like the root of my faith is the changed life, seeing people in my life who are changed and are different. Um, my dad came to faith um, sort of in middle school, and was a different person, and a lot of people in my life who I know came to faith from nothing, right? Because everyone who comes to faith up there is coming to faith from nothing, because um, there's not a lot of like Christianity that's passed from generation to generation. So, um, when I see people who are walking and I know their lives are different and I know that they're not who they used to be, that's a lot. That's the foundation. That's what keeps it going when things seem hard or it's hard to figure things out. To change life, I know that only happens. That doesn't happen outside of God, right? That doesn't happen outside of God working and moving in people's lives. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing a little bit about that. So, I define being a provider as one who blesses and protects. And when in your life have you felt that blessing or protection?
Mm. I mean, certainly with my family, being able to like have a family is is pretty awesome. Uh, I really get to enjoy them, but um, protection. I think in my travels overseas and being able to see sort of different worlds, right? You realize that like security is a relative term because you know, you can feel totally safe walking through one of the least safe countries in the world, or least safe cities in the world, right? Or spend time sort of in an area, and you find out afterwards. Like I remember I was in Madrid, and we were walking around one of the first nights we were there, and kind of walking down the street. And we kind of realized, like, I don't think this is a great street, right? And the next day, we were going on a tour of Madrid, and the guy literally pointed to the street we're at and was like, "Don't go down that street. Like, that's a bad street." And we're like, okay, yeah, we were there last night. And the guy was like, what? Anyway, but I think so sometimes like physical safety is relative. But um, you know, being able to, provide for my family that level of safety, I think honestly, it's a very privileged thing to be able to focus on. I feel very privileged to be able to focus on it, right? I know that, like, because of the family I grew up on in relative wealth, because of the opportunities I've had, because of the positions and the thing that I've been able to be like graciously given. I know that the focus of being able to like yearn for a certain level of safety and a certain level of provision for my children is a privileged state, right? Like I know in speaking with a lot of people who come from backgrounds where they're not given as many things, right? And people that don't look like you or I have to earn a lot more than we did, right? Not to say that we didn't work hard, but like it's not equivalent in a lot of times in our society. And so when I look at the types of questions and the types of things I want for my children and for my family, I know that those are like privileged things to be thinking about. Like I remember specifically speaking with two gentlemen who are older and very successful, um, both African American, but and when they're talking about what they want for their kids, they're wanting like stability, and they're wanting to make sure that they had what they didn't have growing up. And I was honest with them. I said, I don't think about that. I want them to like achieve the things that they want to achieve. I want them to get in a good position. Like I don't think about them surviving. And that's very
Mm,
privileged, right? Like I don't I know that provision for me, when I think about provision for my family, is about things like perspective and going on trips in other countries, not like, are they going to have enough food to eat? Are they going to be able to, survive lives, and I know that's very privileged. I know it's privileged in the United States, and it's privileged in Durham, certainly privileged overseas, and being able to see kind of like day-to-day survival is not a given. And so provision looks very different, I think. And that perspective is is really helpful for me, because it's really something that drives me to make sure that my kids can see that, right? That again, what they've lived with their whole lives, that they've not been concerned about having enough food to eat, concerned that they're going to have a house to sleep in, right, or a bed to sleep in, is not everybody. Not everybody's in that boat. And I need them to know that. I need them to realize that, because I want them to come with a perspective of like, I am richly blessed and provided for. Not for me to them to think that I'm doing that, but for them to realize that, so that they treat people with empathy, and they treat people with respect, and they treat people, and they realize that people are coming from different positions than they are, right? And I'm like, well, why are they doing things like that? It's like, well, they came from a different place than you did, so you can't assume that sort of the same things that are going on in your head are going on in their head. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of where what my mind went to when you talk about provide for provision.
yeah, and it goes back to your adventure with your family abroad, right? Like,
Yeah.
it helps us appreciate why that was so meaningful to you, to expose new perspectives with it, and also, it just feels like you're in the season of wanting to appreciate and just live out a life of gratitude, and so
Yeah.
that's something that I think is always a positive mindset to have, is how do we appreciate, you know, what we have and our families, and also how unique we are, where I'll often tell my girls, like, "Hey, we do things just so you know, girls, we do things that's gonna be weird to other families, and when you go visit families, there's gonna be things that are different about them, right? And so just expect that versus be surprised by it."
Yeah. And you asked me before, like, who my teachers have been, and I think like in that, in teaching me about like the level of privilege that exists in my life, like I've had a lot of people that have been very gracious with me, right? um, from friends of mine in college who, honestly, were the first non like didn't grow up in an area that was incredibly diverse, right? Like I think there were two kids that weren't white in the whole school. And so like in college, meeting some people who really, you know, showed up into my life and were patient with me and to talk with me about realizing like, oh yeah, like all of the things that you've taken for granted in your life and not realized are things that, you're privileged with. Like that is like, and it's still to this day, right? Like working around and having relationships with people who don't look like me and being able to hear, what life is like for them is incredibly important to me. Like I get to work at a building in downtown where I'm a minority every day, and I love it because I love to have the conversations and have the perspective that is like unique to realize that like my experience is not the only one. And it's so important for me to be reminded of that because it's so easy to forget and to just be like living in my own world with what I'm used to, and forget that there's a whole different set of perspectives out there. And it's really important to understand my own position and what I have and to be thankful and to all the things and to be gracious and to be a better provider for my family if I can provide for them like that perspective, if I can provide for them that knowledge that, life looks different for different people. And you have to be able to approach things with empathy and understanding, or, you're not going to be successful, whatever your bank account or whatever your job title looks like.
You know what's fun is I'm realizing how you enjoy being in the minority, like you said about the place that you work today, but also when you were in high school and college, there weren't a lot of Christian believers there, and it seems like you relished in that. So for those
Yeah.
of us that don't like to be in those uncomfortable situations where people around you, like, are think different than you, uh, how
Hmm.
have you embraced that? Like, what makes you drawn to that so that maybe you can encourage other peoples to get out of their comfort zone?
Sure. Um, I think I think without understanding the types of things that you take for granted, it's really hard for you to really appreciate like what you have. And I think also like to realize that there are things that you don't have, right? And different gifts and different perspectives and different values that you don't have, and things that maybe you should, right? I think I'm constantly reminded, in these situations that sometimes things are awkward. Sometimes things feel like, okay, I don't understand this conversation right now. Certainly, like to give the example of we're in India, right? Like the language barrier was one thing, but also like just culturally. I'll tell one story about India. Okay. Um, Culturally there were just some differences that were really really strange, right? And just everyone knew except you, and they didn't even think to tell you because they just assumed you knew. Okay, one of them was the wedding day. Okay, so the wedding day is actually 3 days, and that was a shortened version of an Indian wedding, right? The first 2 days, every event, I was like, I got to be on time. Like, we got to get there. Like, traffic and, Pune was really all over the place. And so I tried to get there on time. I was calling them, telling them I'm late. They're like, oh, the groom isn't even dressed yet. I'm like, okay. So, like, everything started like an hour and a half after the time on the invitation said.
Hmm.
Everything except the actual wedding ceremony. And the time on the invitation turns out like we were expecting to be an hour and a half late. So we were kind of like, oh, it's the third day. Like we're pros at this. Like we'll get there when we get there. Um, and then I start seeing out the door because we're all in the same hotel with everybody. I start to see out the door the grandmothers walking by and they're fully dressed. I'm like, why are they dressed like an hour before the time on the invitation? Because like I was expecting everyone to be late. Um, and so we kind of went down to breakfast and we're like, everyone's like dressed and ready to go. And we're like, why is everyone ready now? Like people weren't even like, seriously, people weren't even dressed when the time was supposed to happen. Turns out in Indian weddings, at least this one, which is only part of India, not all Indian weddings are the same, right? It's like the same thing in the United States, right? It's a big country. Anyway, the time on the invitation was the time they said I do, like the time they actually got married. And the wedding actually started like an hour and a half before that, right? So we were late to the wedding. Like we got there like half an hour before the time on the invitation because we like realized the wedding's starting, and we were like late. We missed like an hour of the wedding, right? Like, which was fine because culturally, they're like everyone just comes and goes. It was fine, but like, no one even thought to tell us this because they just assumed like, didn't you realize that like that time is the time they get married, right? The other dates, the other times are whatever, but the last one is the important one. We're like, no, I didn't realize that. Like, how would we have known that? Um, So sometimes those things happen when you go into spaces that you don't know, right? Sometimes you have those cultural moments where you're like, I don't know what's going on here. But if you lean into them, you learn things, right? I mean, that was kind of a silly example, but um, when you lean in and you really sit down, and you try to listen and you try to understand and you try to gain perspective of a different like place, a different group of people, a different family, a different culture. Um, it's really valuable. It's really valuable to sort of understand where they're coming from and understand a little bit more about like where you are,
Mhm.
and where people are when you try to interact with people. Um, being around, at our church, we spend a lot of time working with, people who are, poor or homeless, and sort of understanding a lot more about what that's like and what that life is gives you empathy, because you realize like, man, sometimes life is hard. And it's not like, you know, sometimes people come from, like wealthy perspectives, and they come into this and they're like, oh, these people just need to work harder. Like, why aren't they working harder? It's like, that is, it could be further from the truth, right? Like sometimes that is not accurate at all. Like sometimes it's just like, man, they've seen more in their life than you've seen in your entire life. And so a different perspective is really helpful. Um, I know, remember my mother had this a lot in school, where sometimes kids would come from different families and different like family situations. I think teachers really appreciate this because they get the kids every day and they get the kids wherever they came from, right? And so I remember my mother telling me a story once of a kid being in her class, and this kid who was very calm and very like respectful and quiet one day came in and was just all over the place and like yelling back at the teachers, and like had to go to like the principals to like, take like a time like to calm down, and it was not their self at all. And the teachers were like, what is happening? This is not this person. And come to find out that morning their father got arrested in front of them in the house and got brought to jail, and in front of them, and then they had to go right on the bus and go to school. So it's like sometimes you don't know where people are coming from, you don't know the perspective they're coming into it. But the more you sort of lean in and try to listen and understand, the more ability that you have empathy, the more ability you have to be able to know where they're coming from, to know how to care for them, to know how to, be in their lives. And that's super important. It's super important to have that perspective.
This has been so fun. I've loved just tapping into your brain about how you learn, how you teach, how you try to grow in empathy, leaning into being different in a group, and then being okay with the awkwardness at the same time. Just continuing to be reminded of everyone's got a story, and maybe just a little curiosity goes a long way, like you do in your career. I always like to ask my guests too this question of through our conversation. There's always this theme of the guests are doing some really unique, intentional decisions in their life to bless and protect others. And your career has done that throughout in the various roles, from teaching others formally to mentoring others as manager, boss, and guiding company leadership decisions and investing in the local community, providing for them. What are you doing in the season to provide for yourself?
Mm. Honestly, like that's always the last thing I think about. I mean, like, yeah, that's a good question. I like I said, I really find enjoyment in being able to take a break. Like, and sometimes, that's the like I love to go find new restaurants. That's really fun for me. So I probably spend a little bit more on that budget item, but again, like it's cheaper than therapy. I really like the opportunity to just like see my kids interact. So like, I love to watch, my kids get to play sports or whatever. Just sit and enjoy watching them. Just brings a smile to my face. What am I doing for me? Um, I realized, okay, so this is going to be random. I realized I like to read, but not like, I don't like to read anything that matters. This is going to sound weird, okay? Like, and sometimes this is okay, right? Um, Growing up, like, I didn't read a lot of books. Like, it just wasn't a thing that I did very much of. Certainly not for pleasure. I did when I was really young, but in like high school and middle school, I think I read like two books, right? And just faked my way through the rest of the test in English class. But, you know, um, I realized like I enjoy sitting down and reading like, but I really like page turners, anything that's like quick, fast, minimal plot, just action, page to page. Like that's my wheelhouse, right? And that's relaxing for me. I also enjoy doing puzzles. Um, Started doing speed puzzling with my daughter, who also likes to do puzzles, which is fun. A little bit of competition for my daughter, who hates competition. But yeah, it's fun. What else do I do? I don't know. Just getting to hang out with my wife is really fun too. I think she and I specifically spend time every night together, which is really important for us to be able to have that time with just us and not need to necessarily like always be around the kids. So yeah.
Hmm. Just a quick follow-up question with the, time with your wife there with Natalie. Do you guys have
Mhm.
any rules about, like, let's not talk about work like you mentioned, or is it just kinda free and open, not structured?
I think she knows that. I think she realizes sometimes she's asked me and I'm like, yeah, I don't really think about that. She's like, okay, yeah. Um, but no, I don't have any like hard and fast rules.
Yeah.
No. It's mainly just getting to hang out and be friends. So yeah.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining, Sean. This has been amazing.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. This is cool. Yeah, it's fun to get to hang out with you. I miss getting to just talk and hang out, so it's a cool opportunity. Yeah,
Well, let's, enjoy one of your lunch breaks and, see,
sure.
where you're going with all the good food in the Raleigh-Durham area, and we'll continue the conversation there. So, thanks, bud.
All right, man. Talk to you later.
Thank you for listening to the Become a Provider show. If you've enjoyed today's episode and want to continue your journey in servant leadership, I invite you to sign up for my free weekly newsletter, Always Provide. Head over to alwaysprovide.org to subscribe. Each week, you'll receive insights, inspiration, and practical tips to help you grow as a servant leader and provider in all areas of your life. Before we wrap up, I'd like to remind you that this podcast is a ministry of the C.L. Thomas Fellowship, a nonprofit organization created to honor my late father, an exemplary provider. The fellowship is dedicated to providing free resources that inspire parents and leaders to emulate Jesus as a servant leader and provider. Your support helps continue this important work. If you found value in today's episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, remember, we're all called to be providers. Let's make a positive difference by serving others. Keep blessing and protecting. This podcast was edited by the Kristen Fields Chadwick podcast team. Kristen and her team are passionate about equipping faith-based podcasts like this one to share their message by owning the entire editing and distribution process. This has been a delight to work with their team, and I'm so excited to partner with them ongoing. So if you want to have their support, hire them at KristenFieldsChadwick.com, or if you just want to learn from their work, you can listen to their podcast titled Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. That's Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. And Kristen has actually been a guest on this very show. You can listen to her story at episode 116.